Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, December 23rd, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 10-5 after a 34-17 loss to the Baltimore Ravens in week 16, courtesy of a tiebreaker, including common opponents, I believe it is. The Steelers are technically still leading the AFC North, but with Kansas City and Cincinnati up next on the schedule, Pittsburgh could be on the verge of collapse, and that's what we're going to get into today. My three reasons why the Steelers might collapse and finish the year 10-7 after getting off to a 10-3 start. They've lost two in a row to the Eagles and to the Ravens. Before I get into my three reasons, I'll tell you why we're doing this on Monday, and we're doing it a little differently than an instant reaction show, and why we can go into the three reasons that the Steelers might collapse instead of just my instant takes after digesting the game immediately. I actually have some space between it, and that's because what might be one of the reasons, NFL scheduling. The Steelers playing on Saturday, of course, going head-to-head against the college football playoff, and that was a dilemma for me, a college sports staff writer here at Fansided, because I was at Beaver Stadium for Penn State SMU, making the drive back, listen to the second half on the radio, a very unique experience for me. Rob King, of course, does an excellent job in his first year in the job, but listen to the second half on the radio as much as I could, and then watch the game yesterday to really take it in and have my opinions on it. But instead of going play for play and really dissecting the actual performance, which I think there's a lot to take away there, and I'll get to it as I go through my three reasons that the Steelers might be collapsing or on the verge of collapse or amidst a collapse, whatever you want to call it. I want to just talk zoomed out a little bit about the state of the Steelers right now heading into games against the Chiefs, who have just one loss on the season, and the surging Cincinnati Bengals, who have not gone away. So we'll start with reason number one, and obviously I hinted at it. It's the schedule. The Steelers coming into the year, I would not have picked them against the Eagles. I would not have picked them against the Ravens, or at least to win both games against the Ravens. Would not pick them against the Chiefs, and would not pick them to win both games against the Cincinnati Bengals. They beat the Ravens. They beat the Bengals earlier. So if you're going to split those are going to happen on the back half of the schedule. And you have the Eagles and the Chiefs mixed in there. It's an absurd schedule. It's been talked about so much, but the Steelers play in 2 days. And the NFL has completely screwed a select group of teams that they've deemed worthy or necessary or whatever to play on Christmas Day, because the NFL wants to take over every single day of the year. So 3 games in 11 days at this point in the season, which is absurd on its own. But when you factor in the Steelers not playing any divisional games until late in the season, right? No divisional games before the bye week. And then you pack in this tight stretch: Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals. It's because the AFC North games are a great television property, and that's the business of the NFL. It is further exacerbated by the sudden need to take over Christmas Day, which was once essentially an NBA property, and the willingness of football to step on the toes of NFL football, to step on the toes of college football, which is something that they really never do. And maybe you could see it as, well, college football is trying to take up some of their space into December, as the NFL typically goes to Saturday with those games. But it was the college football playoff, and the NFL decided to go head to head because they want to take Christmas. And as a consumer of the product, I don't enjoy the direction that the NFL is going with games on every night. I don't like, and have not liked, Thursday night football being every single week. It's too much football. I love football. My job is to watch and talk and write about football. But every night of the week is getting a bit much. So Thursday Night Football, I used to love when it would show up late in the season. Thursday Night Football starting in the beginning of the year, not something I'm a fan of. But okay, you're going to do Thursday. Teams get a mini bye after it. All right. But they're just chipping away at player safety as they continue to do this. And this can sound like a pouty Steelers fan who is watching his team collapse, but it's a legitimate problem that the NFL has foisted upon itself, right? This is a player safety issue. The NFL does not care about player safety. It hurts their product though, because you get teams with tons and tons of injuries building up late in the season, and they were on the verge of a Christmas Day game without TJ Watt or Patrick Mahomes. Both those guys are superhuman, so they returned from their ankle injuries. But that's a very real possibility. And I think at some point the NFL may have a come to Jesus moment, but we're going to keep watching, is the reality. And that's always been the reality with the NFL. But it is a problem. It is putting the Steelers in a really difficult situation. And Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, a fellow Minute Media company, was on Ryan Russillo's podcast, and they were talking about the race for the NFC North, and they were talking about the Thursday night games and whatnot. And Albert Breer said he was at the Lions Packers Thursday night game. Both of those teams played on Thanksgiving, a Thursday game, which Thanksgiving, absolutely understandable to have games that day. They've always had. But they also played the next Thursday. And Albert Breer said, well, at least it's nice that you had a full week between the Thursday games, and now you get the mini bye. And the players he talked to said, well, not really, because our bodies never had a chance to catch up. And I think those are things that the NFL doesn't take into consideration. And the Steelers are not going to have a chance to let their bodies catch up, because a short week, Saturday or Sunday to Saturday, and now Saturday to Wednesday, which is essentially like a Thursday night game. And it's Wednesday afternoon, which is marginal, but even worse that it's a 1 p.m. kickoff. And the fact that it's occurring so late in the season builds on these teams already being banged up, these teams making playoff pushes, and could legitimately impact outcomes as the Steelers see the AFC North slipping away amidst this scheduling nightmare. Couldn't the Steelers have had the Giants late in the year instead of all their divisional games and the Eagles and the Chiefs? But the NFL is not concerned about player safety. The NFL is not concerned about the equity of scheduling, the equity of the travel, anything like that. They're concerned about the best television product, and they're getting a great one on Christmas Day because the Steelers need this game desperately. They likely need to win out to maintain the tiebreaker advantage on the Baltimore Ravens and win the AFC North, which is slipping away with both teams now at 10-5 after the Ravens beat the Steelers on Saturday. And the Chiefs have a chance to lock up the number one seed in the AFC. Buffalo is the only team that could possibly be in that mix. The Bills have 3 losses. They beat the Chiefs, the only team that's beaten the Chiefs this year. And those are pretty good stakes for Christmas Day with recognizable teams, great brands, and Patrick Mahomes. So the NFL is getting a great product, but it's this scheduling nightmare, which we knew it was a nightmare coming into the year. We knew the Steelers needed to make hay early in the season, but it's adding to this collapse, right? I don't think the Steelers losing to the Eagles and the Ravens in back-to-back weeks necessarily says a whole lot to me about who the Steelers are compared to who they were a few weeks ago, especially when you factor in the next reason. And I'll just get to it now as I continue. Reason number 2, and I'm putting it's the most important probably, but these kind of go into one another. Injuries. The Steelers are really banged up right now. And when you're losing to the Eagles and the Ravens in back-to-back weeks without George Pickens, it's hard for me to say you should win those games. It's hard for me to say I expected the Steelers to win either of those games because I didn't. So, in some ways, this is a circumstantial collapse that is looking worse because this team's so injured. And the fact the schedule's played out how it has with divisional games back to back to back and tough opponents back to back to back, that makes it more likely that you're going to be banged up. Those games are always more physical. They're always very close games, especially AFC North games. And so the Steelers are banged up. Against Baltimore, they were without Deshaun Elliott and Dante Jackson in the secondary. I'm just start with the injuries on defense. Obviously, Pickens was out as well. James Pierre played the third most snaps on defense. Corey Trice Jr., who great story, promising prospect and devastating knee injury last year. Like great to see him get his first NFL action, but he played the fifth most snaps on the defense for the Steelers. They lost Joey Porter Jr. in the game to a knee injury. We don't really know the status of where he's going to be at. And they didn't have Larry Ogunjobi up front, which I don't think Ogunjobi is a pendulum swinging player. Like I don't think he is necessarily the difference between a Steelers team that could beat the Ravens and one that can't. But when you can't stop Derrick Henry at all, that loss becomes a bit more noticeable. When you're playing Isaiah Loudermilk and Dean Lowry, many, many more snaps. So the secondary was incredibly banged up. And the Steelers no longer have Lamar Jackson's number because of it. And obviously we're doing the collapse, not just the loss to the Ravens, but to talk specifically to that game, Lamar Jackson kept clean against the Steelers on Saturday. 11 for 11, 158 yards, and 3 touchdowns. A perfect passer rating. Fittingly, he had 158 yards and 3 touchdowns because a perfect passer rating is 158.3. With the state of the secondary right now, the Steelers have to win up front. Their only route to success defensively is winning up front. There isn't really another option for this roster, this current construction of the team. You have to dominate in the trenches. They weren't able to do that against Baltimore, clearly, not just because of the impact they had on Lamar Jackson, but what Derrick Henry was able to do to this team. Because Henry ran absolutely wild. The Steelers have had success against Derrick Henry. Like this isn't just him on the Ravens. They had success last time, but when he was on the Titans, they had relative success against Derrick Henry. 24 carries, 162 yards. He was stellar. Lamar Jackson was very good, very efficient. Not gaudy numbers, 15 for 23 for 207, 3 touchdowns, and the bad interception, which was a miscommunication with Rashad Bateman. But where it showed up is on the back end. It was if Jackson was kept clean, receivers were going to be running wide open, and they were all game. There were plenty of miscommunications in the secondary, right? The first touchdown that the Ravens scored when Corey Trice got put into the game on that wheel route. Trice didn't pass it off, followed the route to the inside. Those things are going to happen when you're banged up, but also it's not impossible to win games with backups on the field. So some of that falls on coaching. But I mean, of course you're going to lose to the Ravens when you're trying to slow down Lamar Jackson, who might win his third MVP this season and has a much better chance of doing it after Josh Allen had a bit of a clunker against the Patriots in a win. When you're relying on Corey Trice and Cam Sutton and James Pierre. That's just not a very viable group, and it's not the way that the Steelers are built. So injuries happen. You would like to see the Steelers play better despite them, but eventually you hit a critical mass in most cases. And the Steelers couldn't slow down Lamar. And they're not going to be able to slow down Patrick Mahomes unless they can really dominate up front, which is a possibility against a Chiefs team that has had question marks, big question marks at left tackle all season, and has DJ Humphries and maybe Joe Tooney kicking out, or just a revolving door at left tackle protecting Patrick Mahomes, the best player in the NFL. On the offensive side with the injuries, the offense just doesn't function without George Pickens. And we kind of knew this. And I'm not sure I learned anything different. Russell Wilson is not a guy that's going to carve a defense up consistently, marching his way down the field. He hits big shots. And if he doesn't have a guy to make those plays down the field, he's not going to hit many big shots. And aside, Calvin Austin is fantastic. And his development into what to me looks like a legitimate wide receiver 2, like a very plus wide receiver 3, maybe an actual wide receiver 2 if you have a good wide receiver 3, like a Jacoby Myers is better than that, but a Jawan Jennings, maybe when he was healthy, a Kendrick Bourne, a player like that that's reliable on the outside. You could have Austin be a field stretcher from the slot and be your de facto wide receiver 2. Like, his development into that means the Steelers need one receiver this offseason and not 2 or 3. And that player, that wide receiver 2 or 3 that the Steelers wanted was Van Jefferson. And Van Jefferson was kind of a better fit for that than Mike Williams ever was. So they're just at a weird spot right now, but the injury of Pickens has forced Wilson to trust Calvin Austin. And Calvin Austin is coming through. He is a dynamic field stretcher, an undersized guy, but I think he's going to be a guy who plays in the league for a fairly long time. 4 catches for 65 yards on 5 targets. The only catch he didn't make was the 4th down. And we can talk about the decision a little bit. I liked the 4th down decision, and I liked taking a shot there. They had it. Wilson just underthrew it. But offensively, behind Pickens and then Austin, you're in a situation where you have guys like Ben Skoranek and Cordero Patterson making big plays for you. And that's just, you can only patchwork things together enough. And really, you can mostly only do it on one side of the ball, right? If the offense was humming on all cylinders and fully healthy, the defense could maybe get by. Or if the defense was locking teams down and slowing the Ravens down, the offense could sneak by. It's hard to do it on both sides of the ball. The Steelers are really injured. I don't want it to be like completely writing things off because they have real flaws. And I want to talk about Mike Tomlin's involvement in this situation and what I think of him as a coach, because some of my frustrations about Tomlin are being exemplified by this current team. But even on the offensive line, you have Mason McCormick and Broderick Jones starting, where you hope to have James Daniels and Troy Fautanu. It's a good thing they've invested so much up there, but so they have serviceable players, replacement level players at right guard and right tackle. But Mason McCormick did not have a good game on Saturday, and neither did Broderick Jones. And Broderick Jones has been up and down, showing signs of development. Mason McCormick has certainly shown signs of development as a 4th-round rookie from the FCS level going to the NFL. That's just such a difficult thing to do. And it's now stalled out a running game that was somewhat reliable against inferior competition, but is now being completely shut down. And that means you're relying heavily on Russell Wilson without George Pickens. It's just not a winning formula. And yet, the Steelers there was a path on Saturday, right? It ended up being a blowout, but that happened on Russell Wilson's pick six, and then things got away. The Steelers were in that game for quite a while and they were moving the ball in the first half, and that's an improvement from what happened against Philadelphia. So this is looking like a Steelers collapse, and if you made me pick right now, I would bet on the Steelers to lose the next two games and finish with the fifth or sixth seed in the AFC, losing the AFC North to the Ravens. I think the Ravens are a substantially better team. I think the Chiefs should beat the Steelers, and I think the Bengals probably will too. AFC North games, you're gonna split unless one of the teams is awful, and the Steelers still didn't sweep the Browns. So it is looking like a collapse, and there are reasons to say Mike Tomlin has still done a great job coaching this year. He was really maybe the front runner for Coach of the Year when he made the switch from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson. But now he's complicit in the collapse. I won't say responsible for, and I guess it's a collapse that hasn't fully happened yet, because the Steelers could beat the Chiefs on Christmas Day, 2 days from now, in a weird game on a holiday at home. Mike Tomlin is a home underdog. You never really want to bet against him in that situation. That could flip everything on its head. And suddenly the Steelers could win the AFC North, and all could be well with a 12-win season. So I'm not taking that off the table, because if the Steelers get healthy, and that's possible, because Tomlin said that Justin Fields, Deshaun Elliott, Dante Jackson, George Pickens, and Larry Ogunjobi, who all missed last week, have an opportunity to play next week. So I'm not ruling that out, but it feels like things are going in the wrong direction. And that brings me to Mike Tomlin. The NFL is a weird league because, as Tomlin said post-game, I'm not quoting anything, but essentially one of his messages was, the ball was put on the ground, it bounced their way, not ours. There were 5 fumbles in the game. 4 of them were recovered by Baltimore. And while that's incredibly reductive to just say, if the Steelers recover 3 of those 5, they maybe win the game, possibly win the game. It's also kind of true about the NFL. The margins are so slim in this league, I'll say that league because I'm not in it. The margins are so remarkably slim that the direction that a well-inflated oblong ball bounces can determine quite a few outcomes. But my problem with Mike Tomlin, and I talked a little bit earlier in the year about how he was kind of getting out of this a little bit when he seemed to believe in Russell Wilson, is that he in some ways coaches every game, especially when he feels like the talent level on his team is a bit subpar, like it's being played in a monsoon. And you can still win football games when you lose the turnover margin. It's not an impossibility. The Washington Commanders beat the Philadelphia Eagles yesterday despite turning the ball over 5 times. And yes, the Eagles had Kenny Pickett playing for much of that game, but the offense really wasn't the problem for the Eagles. The defense was. Washington kept coming at them with aggressive play calling, very talented young quarterback, and they were able to overcome turnovers because that's possible. And one of my frustrations is, I guess the best way to put it, with Mike Tomlin, is that in a lot of ways, he coaches football games, like I said, like it's a monsoon every game, but His entire philosophy to football in a lot of ways is there are going to be 3 to 4 very important plays a game with fumbles, turnovers, something like that. And controlling those relatively random plays is kind of all that matters to winning a game. But in that scenario, like with that philosophy, you have to win like 3 of 4 plays, or maybe in Saturday's case, 3 of 5 of those fumbles had to go over your way, or maybe 4 of 5, and not 1 of 5 or 1 of 4, which is only 2 or 3 plays going a different way. Plays that have a lot of inherent entropy as a ball is bouncing on the ground. Like, it's not just fumbles, but turnovers and maybe even some explosive plays on offense because you only take so many shots. Is it's only 2 or 3 different plays going a different way. Instead of trying to win on aggregate 75 of 100 plays and not 25 of 100 plays, which are the same percentage, but vastly different in terms of how you're controlling a football game. He, in so many ways, wants to just leave a lot of things up to the football gods and play the opponent to a stalemate on 96 of the plays. And if the ball bounces his way, his team's going to come out victorious. And that can lead to a lot of 10-win seasons, and it has, because you're basically turning every game into a coin flip. And he's been able to do it with really inferior quarterback play, which is a very impressive thing to do in the NFL. The fact that the Steelers haven't bottomed out post Ben Roethlisberger is remarkable. The Patriots, post Tom Brady, completely tanked to the point where they had to part ways with Bill Belichick. And Mike Tomlin kept this thing rolling. And he deserves a ton of credit for that. But at some point, you need to try to win 75 of 100 plays in a game, right? And he did that when Ben was Ben. And I felt like he was doing that in the beginning of the season when the offense was healthy and he started to trust Russell Wilson. So maybe that's still in his repertoire, and he just feels that this team is not up to that talent level and that his defense is hurting so much. He needs it to come down to a bit of randomness, right? He needs to win a game. He has a better chance of winning 3 of 4 plays than winning 75 of 100 with the talent of his team at this point. And to me, that's reflected in the 4th down decision, right? Because the Steelers, let's find the specific play and specific 20, our Steelers down 24-17. The very first play of the 4th quarter, 4th and 6 from the Baltimore 45, just outside Boswell's field goal range. And Wilson takes a deep shot to Calvin Austin, and it's underthrown. Kyle Hamilton backtracks to it and breaks it up. And Kyle Hamilton for the Ravens has been excellent since they moved him from nickel back to deep safety because that's where they needed help. And he is a true Swiss Army knife and one of the best safeties the NFL's seen in a little while. I would certainly say better than Minkah Fitzpatrick, who finally had an interception, but is having a somewhat pedestrian year. At least not game-changing the way Kyle Hamilton is. And I like the aggressiveness of that decision because you're trying to win the game. But through one lens, it's aggressiveness. Through another, it's desperation. And it's fitting that on the very next play, the Steelers gave up a huge run to Derrick Henry when the Ravens took over possession. Because, and Lamar turned over the ball and it went back and forth a little bit. So the game was not done at that point. But he doesn't believe in his defense. And it's his defense. And it's banged up. But it's possible to have a functional unit with backups in the NFL. And at this point, with the NFL, and this is getting to the other two reasons, right? They're building on each other. As the NFL schedule continues to expand, it's at 17 games now. It's almost certainly going to go to 18. As they play on more days of the week and have more infrequent and infrequent rest and short weeks and weird travel situations and trips to Europe, teams are going to be more and more banged up. So a prerequisite of being a head coach in a lot of ways is to raise the floor of your team. And it's fitting to me that Russell Wilson and Mike Tomlin have found each other, because in a lot of ways, they're both ceiling raisers. And this is so bizarre to say because Mike Tomlin has been like the ultimate floor raiser as a head coach to get them to 9 wins. But offensively and schematic wise, a lot of that has to do with talent for Tomlin, that floor. And he's really good at getting the best out of players to play to their talent. But his scheme in no ways like gives you this great ceiling. And Russell Wilson is somebody who can raise the ceiling of a very talented offense, is my point, right? When Mike Tomlin had one of the most talented teams in the league that he inherited from Bill Cowher. And I don't mean to be like a Tomlin didn't win his own Super Bowl, because he absolutely did. But when he had a really talented team, he was able to take them to a Super Bowl and win. When he doesn't, it's just so talent dependent for a coach like Tomlin. And in a lot of ways, the way Russell Wilson plays quarterback is so talent dependent, not just on his talent, but the talent of the offense around him, because he is also a high variance in low number of plays guy when he's at his best. He throws a lot of deep balls, the moon balls, and those are going to connect on a 60% rate when it's George Pickens trying to catch them, and a 40% one, it's Mike Williams. And that's the razor thin margin between a successful offense and not. And in Seattle, Pete Carroll protected him so much with the run game and a talented receiving core. But once the let Russ cook thing happened, the floor started to fall out in a lot of ways. And it definitely did in Denver when it was all the offense was built around Russell Wilson, because he's a high variance player. He's a boom or bust player. He is a deep shot or sack or turnover guy. And if you introduce more plays where those things can happen, there's a higher likelihood you're going to have more sacks and more turnovers, maybe more explosives. But one day when you get none of the good stuff and all the bad, the floor is going to completely fall out. And Tomlin is really good at on a season long basis, like getting a team to 9 wins. But when the talent floor starts to dissipate, I don't know that he really has the best answers. And I'm talking most specifically on the defense, because the Steelers aren't the only team with injuries. The Lions, one of the best teams in the NFC, and that's largely because of their offense, but their defense is functional against not the best offenses in the NFL. Like Josh Allen torched them, but Josh Allen torches a lot of defenses. Aaron Glenn does a good job of mixing things up and being aggressive defensively. He's giving them a chance with his scheme, and in a way that I don't think Mike Tomlin's defense does. I think Mike Tomlin and Pete Carroll and Dan Quinn from the Tampa 2 days and from the Cover 3 days, right? Because those were the metas of NFL defense for a while. It was Tampa 2 with Tomlin and those Bucs teams and whatever. And then it was Cover 3, Dan Quinn, win with your 4 down rushers and let your talented corners play a little off and close on the ball and hit really hard. And that's a talent-based defense in a lot of ways. And now the ethos or the meta in the NFL defensively is not a talent-based unit. It's a Brian Flores, Mike McDonald unit. It's a lot of sim pressures and dropping out of it. It's 8 in coverage. It's cover 0 blitz. And it's mixing those things up because you're trying to create more of those bigger plays and you're more able to cover up for talent deficiencies. Because Brian Flores in Minnesota last year, their defense is talented this year. It was not a very talented defense a year ago. And he got a lot out of it by doing some really funky stuff. And the best defenses in the NFL this year are the ones that do a lot of funky stuff. And now that the Steelers are losing their talent in the secondary and they're still just playing the lineup and play defense, they blitzed a good bit against Lamar, but Corey Trice gets exposed and Cam Sutton gets exposed and Beanie Bishop gets exposed. And it's just a flip of those defenses were about letting your really good players play their best. And I think defensively, Tomlin doesn't always do a good job of getting your not so good players to play good enough, if that makes sense. And with Russ, it's similar on offense. That if he has really talented guys around him, it could look really good. But when he doesn't, you're going to run into some pretty big problems. And this is a really under-talented offense. And it put together some functional drives with Ben Skronik. And I think Arthur Smith is trying in the run game, right? He's making adjustments and doing different things. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are just not finding success. I think the offensive line is a big reason. I think there are plenty of reasons. I don't think they fit the outside zone scheme. I think Jaylen Warren does better than Najee Harris, but even then, this isn't the perfect offense for those guys. But on offense, too, teams that have lost their playmakers, like the Bucks with Liam Cohn, their new offensive coordinator who was with the Rams and then went back to Kentucky to be the OC and then to Tampa Bay after Dave Canales took the job in Carolina. And Dave Canales is doing an excellent job with Bryce Young. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were out for a stretch this year. And Liam Cohen was patching things together with Cade Otton targets and Bucky Irving and Rashad White out of the backfield and making things work. And that's more important than ever in the NFL because with the way the schedule lays out, teams are going to be banged up. You're not going to be at 100% heading into the playoffs. You're going to have guys out. So do you have these creative coaches who can find answers when you're not at 100%? And Tomlin can drag a team to 10 wins as well as anybody. And it is a skill. But he's at his best when he has really good talent. And it's hard to maintain that talent. That's a reason, back to the Seattle example, that those Seahawks teams weren't dynastic. They came close. They were a goal line interception away from 2 Super Bowls, and they were in some other NFC championship games, but it was so talent dependent that year over year, it was hard to kind of maintain that. And the best option, of course, is to have an elite quarterback because that solves a lot of these problems and gives you the floor you need and the ceiling raiser. And the Steelers don't have one. So in a lot of ways for Tomlin, that is a valid excuse for not beating the best teams in the NFL when you need to and likely for not winning a playoff game this year because it's feeling less and less likely that the Steelers are going to. Though again, things could look very different when Pickens gets back healthy and when some of the defensive players get back healthy and we find out what the deal is with Joey Porter Jr. and Dante Jackson and these guys. But like to try to wrap it up in a good way, which is kind of hard to do. A George Pickens go ball is worth more, maybe it's a 40-yard gain, than a Kyle Shanahan play action crosser that gets 6 yards. But that Shanahan crosser, you can accomplish it with a lot of different guys out there. And Russ and the Steelers on offense and defense need their best guys out there to be working at their best level. And in some ways, talent in the NFL used to set the floor, and coaching was kind of a way to reach the ceiling, right? It was about getting your best players to play their best. And now it's kind of the other way around. Shanahan sets an amazing floor, offensively specifically. But a guy like Mahomes is what's going to raise your ceiling. And that's why McVay needed Stafford and not Goff. Something I thought about is in movies, directors and scriptwriters, right? Great actors improvising will always produce the best stuff in a movie. They always say when it's the best line, you hear the director's cut, whatever, and they say, oh, the actor came up with that on the spot. And some of the best comedy movies are just mostly improv. But what happens when you don't have DiCaprio? Then how's your movie? Tomlin is a great director and writer, in my opinion, like a Judd Apatow. You hear about his comedy movies, of course, and they write out a loose plan of what's going to happen. They write the drama and they improvise all the comedy. And that's great when you have Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill and all these hilarious people. But it could go bad if you don't have great actors, giving them that much freedom to let their talent shine. Because you're also going to let them sink if Corey Trice has to play 50 snaps a game. But what about, on the flip side, a guy like Aaron Sorkin, who wrote A Few Good Men, which was on yesterday and is one of the things that prompted me to think about this. He's such a meticulous and snappy and quick script writer. Social Network is that way. They talk so quickly and it's written so sharp that you could have a pretty great movie with a lot of different actors because you're controlling more of it. And I think that's what you need to do in a lot of ways in the NFL as the season gets longer, as we get bigger sample sizes, because you're not going to luck your way and the ball bounce your way to a Super Bowl. You need to mix the two things together. The best case scenario is you have a great script and great actors, and you get the Chiefs. And Andy Reid is kind of the perfect mix. He's a guy who can make any quarterback great. Andy Reid made Alex Smith awesome in Kansas City, but doesn't put a ceiling on his quarterback like Aaron Rodgers felt Matt LaFleur did in Green Bay. Those offenses sputtered late in games or in the playoffs because they were very designer heavy. They weren't loose and playmaking heavy. They were do this, go here, play action. You need a mix of both. The injured Steelers right now need designer, but Russ and Tomlin prefer flow, but don't have the guys out there to succeed that way. And another way you can provide a floor as a coach is by being analytically sound, both in-game management and play style. And play action is something that's a very analytically positive thing. And I just don't think the Steelers offensively and just the whole meta and ethos of this team. And this is kind of a very overarching thing, but Mike Tomlin's been coaching here long enough that we can kind of look at these long trends. I don't think I just have a hard time seeing the Steelers be in a position to win a Super Bowl with Mike Tomlin. And that was true before they lost these 2 games. But it's just giving such a good example of it. The Packers won big games this year with Malik Willis. You got to be able to win without your best guys. Injuries are a huge problem for the Steelers. But they're a huge problem for almost everyone in the league. And I just don't know that Mike Tomlin is a guy that's able to overcome them in the way that you'd like to. So that might be why the Steelers could collapse. Obviously need a drink of water after that rant. The Steelers and the Chiefs on Christmas Day. We got to get to that. Before we get to that and the preview, if you're a fan of Steelers football and you enjoy listening to me go on rants about script writers and directors and how they're like NFL coaches, subscribe. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube especially. We really appreciate your support. We're growing this thing, continuing to grow it. We have multiple shows every week, a lot of instant reaction shows, though I will not have one on Christmas Day. My apologies. Enjoy time with your family. I will too. So please subscribe. And because we have 2 different shows, and because I'm typically doing instant reactions, I don't do a lot of previewing. So let's see how it goes. Steelers Chiefs Christmas Day preview. We'll see about this game. The Chiefs are coming off a 27-19 win over the Texans on Saturday. They also played on Saturday, of course, so they could play on Wednesday. They're now 14-1. Need 1 win to clinch the number 1 seed in the AFC. Have the Steelers and the Broncos left on their schedule. 1 week after a high ankle sprain, Patrick Mahomes, who may or may not be human, it's still up for debate, ran for 33 yards and a touchdown on 5 carries. He's not hurt. He doesn't get hurt. He's a mutant. He's the best player in the NFL. This Chiefs team, all year we've been talking about how it's such a flawed Chiefs team. They're 14-1 and have a very real path to winning 16 games. It's ridiculous. That guy is ridiculous. Andy Reid is ridiculous. The offense is getting better right now. He's not hurt, and they're getting healthier. Hollywood Brown was back. Xavier Worthy is developing into his role as their speedster, deep threat guy that they drafted in the first round out of Texas. Also, Hollywood Brown. When did ESPN start putting Hollywood Brown as like his actual name in the, box scores and whatever? Marquise Brown. Did he change? Did he change his name, or do you just have to change? Like you have to send an email. Your agent sends an email to ESPN, or maybe to your team, I guess. And you could be like, in the roster this year, I want to be Hollywood Brown, which is fine. I don't have any problem with it. But it's just, when did that happen? Because that wasn't the case before. That was like Robbie Anderson became Robbie Chosen and then Chosen Anderson. And I don't know what his name is now. Hollywood Brown, a little bit better, maybe a little more cachet to actually do that. But regardless, they have good receivers now. And it's a sneaky good receiver group because they have DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce and even Juju Smith-Schuster. It's not a bad group. The big problems for the Chiefs are at left tackle and at cornerback. The Steelers can certainly exploit the left tackle one. The health of George Pickens will be a big determining factor in terms of exploiting the problems that they have at corner. Mahomes last week, even under pressure, he was great. 9 of 13 for 77 yards, only 1 sack on 17 pressure dropbacks. Mobility is not an issue for this guy, even after that high ankle sprain. For the season, though, there are more negative plays than normal. And that's not even just in terms of the raw numbers that you would maybe assume when you have a big question mark at offensive tackle, but it's also the pressure to sack ratio, which is a big deal. It's at 17%, up 7% from each of the past 2 seasons when it was at 10%. You knew that if you could do the math quicker than I could get it out. He's averaging 6 yards per attempt under pressure. That doesn't sound great. He's averaging 6.6 yards per attempt for the season. His average depth of target is insanely low. The Chiefs just do not push the ball down the field. They beat you death by 1,000 cuts, and they're really good at it because they have Patrick Mahomes. And that means that while pressure is important and left tackle is a problem, you need quick pressure because Mahomes can get it out quickly. His time to throw is still, I think, 2.7 seconds, so it's higher. But the Steelers need to get home. They need to get home quickly. And in a lot of ways, they kind of need to sell out to do it, which is to my aggressiveness point. Like, try to force the issue. The Steelers, every time they played Brady, sat back in zone and let him carve them up. If they do the same thing, Mahomes will carve them up. Bring some heat. Bring some different looks. Force the issue. They can't block on the edges. You have excellent edge rushers. Put multiple of them out there. Send corners. Send different looks. Drop guys, drop 8 into coverage. If you're going to drop everybody and give a different look. The Steelers need to force some turnovers. Going back to my point at the beginning, they're so heavily reliant on things like turnovers. Okay, force the issue and try to get some. You're going to give up some big plays. Well, you're going to give up 11 play, 17 play, 68-yard touchdown drives anyways. So give it up in a chunk. But maybe you get a strip sack. The Chiefs are a better team than the Steelers, and they're playing much better now. A few weeks ago, I felt like the gap was a little bit closer. And now my mind has changed, not so much because of the Steelers' 2 losses, but more so because of the way the Chiefs are playing and the fact that they keep winning and are looking better and better doing it. And they just beat the Texans, and it wasn't on some last-minute voodoo, which is still an option if you play them close. So if Tomlin wants to drag them into a rock fight, nobody's better at winning a close one than Patrick Mahomes. On the other side of the ball, the Chiefs have a great run defense. The Steelers aren't going to be able to run the ball effectively. They aren't able to run the ball effectively against bad run defenses. It's not going to be much better against the Chiefs. And Chris Jones, I believe, leads the NFL in pressures now. Russell Wilson, not the best with interior pressure. Chris Jones on Mason McCormick. I think Jones is going to win that more often than not, which means either a scramble game from Wilson or getting it out quickly. If Pickens is there, take some shots. Wilson's a high variance quarterback, and that's what might happen in this game. And you may need those things to all hit right to beat the Chiefs. I forgot to mention the line of this one. The Steelers are 2.5-point underdogs at home. The over-under is 43.5. Mike Tomlin is excellent as a home underdog. He has always been excellent as a home underdog. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are because I don't have them up. I can try to stall and get them. But Mike Tomlin as a home underdog is a good bet typically. I'm not going to feel great about it when it's the Chiefs on the other side. As a home underdog since Mike Tomlin took over, the Steelers are 19-6-3 against the spread. So maybe you want to take those 2.5 points. I don't feel very good about it. The Chiefs still need this one. They need to close out that number 1 seed. Well, they don't need to. They went on the road last year and were able to beat the Ravens in Baltimore. But I'm sure they'd certainly like to have that number 1 seed. This game could come down to health in a lot of ways, right? It's a different situation if George Pickens is healthy. It's a different situation and conversation. Joey Porter Jr. and Dante Jackson and all these guys are healthy, and it seems like relatively short-term injuries for most of them. So it's a good chance that maybe Deshaun Elliott's back, maybe George Pickens is back, maybe Larry Ogunjobi's back, and that could change things because the Steelers then could maybe overwhelm the Chiefs up front and have a few more answers in the secondary. But things feel like they're headed south, and I don't see any real reason to say that changes. So I'll be taking the Chiefs in this one. And it may not be the most fun Christmas day in Pittsburgh. Maybe not an immaculate extension type of Christmas day in Pittsburgh. And how fun. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I tweeted it and posted it on Blue Sky. Follow me on Blue Sky if you're there. Twitter is less fun than it used to be. At Yourish3 everywhere, of course. But I was watching Sam Darnold and Geno Smith have a weird back and forth shootout where they were both kind of awesome until Geno threw a late interception. And watching Justin Jefferson, and the same could go for watching the Bengals and Jamar Chase, but it reminded me of how fun it was to watch the Steelers week in and week out, knowing you have Antonio Brown on the team. Just when you get to root for and cheer for the best wide receiver in the NFL, God, that's a good feeling. It's just, I think it's better than the best running back, and obviously it's not as good as the best quarterback, though I've never gotten to cheer for that guy. Not a Patriots fan, and that was pretty much my whole life. Not a Chiefs fan either, though I bet on the Chiefs in the playoffs fairly often, so I enjoy it in those cases. But when the Steelers had Antonio Brown, that was just so fun to know when that ball's up on a deep shot, your guy's probably going to make a play on it. And at times, George Pickens feels that way, but he's clearly not the best in the NFL. Justin Jefferson is what made me think of that. And the Steelers continue to get great receivers. Hopefully they can get one in the offseason. And I don't think I'll end here. It looks like the Steelers could be collapsing. And I don't think it means they're any farther away than I previously thought. I still think the Steelers could beat the Texans in a road playoff game. I think if the Steelers played the Ravens again, slightly healthier, I think they could beat them in the playoffs. This team is better than last year's team. This team is better than other 10-win Mike Tomlin teams. This team, if it can add a wide receiver in the offseason, which I've seen, different intriguing, talented wide receivers, though this isn't a particularly great wide receiver draft class, mocked to the Steelers in different mock drafts. I do think with Russell Wilson back, adding a little bit of talent, there is reason to still think organizationally the arrow's pointed up. And so I'll leave you with a little bit of positivity as I spend an hour saying why the Steelers are kind of collapsing and potentially falling back to just another 10-win season, which would be a really big disappointment after winning 10 of the first 13 games of the year. Enjoy some Christmas Day football. I know I will. Enjoy some time with your family and everything. And Tommy's shows will be back. My shows will be back. An instant reaction show will be on deck for the final week of the season against the Bengals. That's the next time, likely the next time that you'll be hearing from me, almost certainly the next time you'll be hearing from me. And until then, have a good holiday season and go Steelers.